Hello and welcome to the DevDC podcast. My name is Shay Reardon, and today we have Jim Cuff, who is currently the CTO of Cuff Technology Solutions. Jim, great to see you, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, good to see you again, Shay. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Jim. So we're happy to have you. You come to us today with over 30 years of working experience in technology, and we'll get into it a little bit. But prior to starting your own business, you were at Amazon, right? Leading a team of software engineers and scientists in Cambridge,
Mass. The Alexa group.
Yep. Wonderful. So, Jim, let's just hop right into it. Would you mind, telling us your story wherever you want it to begin?
Yeah, I'll jump around a little bit and Shay,
Cool.
direct me where you need to, right? I'll
Sure.
say that for me, I feel like I've been pretty lucky in sort of my technology journey and my career journey. As a frame of reference, I'll start when I was in college. So I went to Boston College. I went into the School of Management as a finance major, and this is in the 80s. And they had this thing where they're like, hey, computers are going to be like a thing. You need to know how they work. And they had some intro technology classes you needed to take. And I'm like, wow, this is way more interesting to me than finance, right? So I'd say that's sort of been sort of a touchstone for me throughout my career, is like when you find something that's interesting, right? If it's sort of like, the notion of if it's got a good smell, like this is something that could be really compelling, like dig into it and follow it, right? So I ended up graduating BC, double majoring in finance and computer science. The finance has actually served me pretty well as I've run larger organizations and needed to deal with budgets and planning and operational logistics and things like that I got through the School of Management. But for me, I got hooked on the technology, right? So I went from managerial accounting and financial accounting to assembly language, right? So, sort of really got right into sort of the lower level tech. And even as I've progressed in my career and gotten further away from the sort of hands-on of the technology, I've always been sort of a technology enthusiast and interested in knowing how things work and what makes things go. So I think that's a piece that I've sort of kept with. I think the other piece I'd share for my career is I didn't necessarily get locked into one area. So I started as a programmer, and I'm looking at sort of some of the stuff I did is, I did programming, I did systems administration, I did networking, I did a stint as a CIO. I got into sort of a SaaS application delivery, right, and then sort of into more modern paradigms later in my career. But I'd say throughout that, while those were different jobs, they all had that same characteristic of there's something new here to learn. There's something that's interesting and engaging. And for me, I've been really lucky in my career. I think about it in a few different buckets. So there's the things you love to do.
Yeah.
There's the things that you're good at. And there's the things that have value in the market, right? So
Sure.
The things you love to do that you're good at, maybe you're bad at, and that aren't valuable in the market, some of those are hobbies, right? Some of the things, if you're a mission-driven person, you may be good at something, you may have a passion for it, and maybe it's not necessarily valuable in the market, but you're like, you know what, I don't care, I'm doing this because I love it. I don't care if I make a lot of money. But to me, that those for me, what worked out is I was doing stuff I loved. It turns out I was generally pretty good at it, and there were things that were sort of valuable to companies that let me sort of drive my career forward. I had a couple different crossroads, and I'll let you jump in a second.
Okay.
Around, I had some decisions around, like, do I want to get my MBA? Do I want to go back to school? And for me at the time, I was working at Mass Financial Services. I was running all the network gear. I was running open systems. I had desktops, market data. I'm like, I could go to school and get some more formal education. But the job I'm in now is going to kind of require me to lean in, and I'm like going to have no time for family or other things if I add another sort of highly structured piece. So I think I followed my heart, but I also tried to make some strategic decisions around like, where should I be? How long should I stay there? And like, when can, for both myself and my family, can we have, manage to like take something on?
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you certainly have a diverse background, right? And you kind of talked about, you've been a programmer, you just talked about managing networking, you've done time as a CIO. We just talked about a little bit about you being the director at the Alexa division, which obviously involves like machine learning. So, there's two, I guess, buckets that I want to put out there, right? One is you seemingly had a bunch of different roles in IT. And then the other one is you worked at a bunch of different kinds of organizations, both in their technology and like the size of the organization, ranging from like, Veracode. And you started really early at Iron Mountain, but you were there when, they had data centers in every, large
I joined
city.
Iron Mountain pre-IPO. So
Yeah.
I joined as a $75 million revenue company, left at $3 billion. So
yeah, that's amazing. And you got to see a good 15-year run as that happened. And I'm sure there was a lot that came from that, maybe you couldn't get during your MBA. So, what was the variety in your career? Was that intentional or did it just kind of happen?
Candidly, it's a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
So for me, like my view is, I'll use Iron Mountain as an example. So
Okay.
I was there for a long time. But I'd say I never had the same job for more than 2 years. So I was lucky enough to take on new challenges and sort of grow my career without needing to change companies. Right. And, I was lucky enough to not have to, go find a new place to work or change my commuting schedule or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily locked into a single thing. For that whole time, right? And in terms of, what was purposeful versus lucky, I think it's definitely both, right? I think I had some good opportunities at the right time, but I also say there were pieces where, I did make decisions around like, hey, this is not going to work for me, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I was working at a quasi-state agency, early in my career, got excellent reviews, and it's, a state budget. And the answer is like, you did a really good job. Everybody's getting a cost of living adjustment. You're not going to get any type of a raise based on your performance. And based on where I was in my career and what I saw sort of opportunities moving forward, for me, that wasn't the right choice at the time to stay. So I'm like, okay, I learned a lot, but it probably doesn't make sense for me to be here for a really long time.
Sure.
So it's sort of a combination of that, thinking analytically about it, but then also like, hey, this is super interesting. I can really lean into this and learn a lot here. So.
Yeah. And that goes to your third bucket, right? Your value in your market. Make sure you capture that. So I want to tell like a quick story, and then I think you'll probably know where my question's going to go.
Okay.
Or at least a little bit what I'm thinking. So in 2009, and we're dating ourselves and people are going to figure out my age. I was an intern, right? And I was at Iron Mountain where you were, and we would do like meetings with leadership, right? Like with C-level people. And one of the questions came up was, these are the business leaders at an IT company. And I think for all the listeners out there, people know what Iron Mountain is for the most part, but, a multi-billion-dollar organization storing some of the most important data in the world, across the world. And there's certain expectations of IT to deliver to the business. And one of the questions was, hey, how do you determine when a product is going to be released? And your name came up as one of the IT leaders that people would talk to for understanding the true timelines to ship product, right?
Okay.
So my question to you is like, how did you get to the place to earn that kind of reputation?
It's kind of an interesting thing because I think as a leader, and this gets to like when people look at, I think leaders can be different than managers, right? You don't need to be a manager to be a leader. And I think, when you're in an organization, you want to be somebody who's trusted to provide judgment. And I think one of the things that I think that I try to do is make sure you're able to make the hard calls, right? And I think part of it is also being willing to be brave enough to be a truth teller, even if you need to tell somebody something they don't want to hear, right? So,
Yeah.
And I think you can aspire to do that, but then what needs to happen is you need to actually do it when the moment comes, right? When someone's like,
Right.
hey, the release is Friday. We've got this big customer who really wants this. Like
Right.
everybody's going to be like really upset if this release doesn't go out. Like if the right answer is, yeah, but everybody's going to be even more upset on Monday when it breaks. So the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'll go talk to the customer and tell them why, right? Like, so I think you need to be able to, if that situation comes up, be able to sort of step above the fray a little bit and provide the best answer, even if it's not the answer people want to hear.
Right.
Right. And then there may be times when it's an opportunity to be a little more aggressive. And if you build some credibility around, you're not someone who's just going to ship stuff willy-nilly. I think there's a judgment piece now. And I think when you look at modern software development and CI/CD, in a mature practice, the answer should be, if my pipeline's green, it's going to get shipped. If something goes wrong, it's going to auto roll back. And this is going to be a complete non-event, right? So when you don't have that, and then sometimes you need to rely on, sort of bigger change management decision-making, I think that's where that piece would come in.
Yeah, and things have certainly changed since 2009, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea of being elite with software delivery wasn't really there. So it's kind of an interesting segue, right? Like, you spent 15 years at Iron Mountain. Then I want to get the timeline right. From there, was it Veracode?
Veracode, yeah.
Yep. And then Constant Contact after Veracode.
Yeah.
So could you tell me a little bit about what it was like leading like an engineering team at an organization like a Veracode and a Constant Contact, where it's such high growth and it's kind of forward thinking technology?
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't much different than how I thought about it at Iron Mountain, right? So I've got sort of some stuff for me that's over the years I figured out, like, these are the things that drove a lot of this part of my career, right? So for me, whenever I went to a different role, I was like, there was 4 things that I would look for in general, right? So one is like, people matter, right? Like the people you work with matter. You can use lots of different words, whether it be around culture, company values, whatever it may be, but sort of the people you're doing something with matter. Right? The team matters, right? And for me, it's not just the team you lead, but it's also the team you're on and who your peers are and how you support each other. The second piece was like, are we actually on a shared mission? Do we have alignment around what we're trying to get done? And then for me, the couple of things that I think are maybe a little bit more specific for what I was looking for is I'm a scale person. I like technology at scale, right? So whether it was figuring out how to make something go at Iron Mountain, or figuring out for Veracode how we could support some really important use cases around, like, how can we get these results to customers back quicker? Like, at that point, it was the scale for Veracode was, all right, we're trying to move into CI/CD. Getting results for scan in a day doesn't really work in a CI approach, right? Or even CD, right? Like, you can't have a gate that takes 24 hours, right? So the notion of scale is not just do more, but do more faster, right? So for me, tech at scale has always been a big piece. And then the last piece is for me, which is related to scale, is being in a company that's winning and really growing, right? So, and part of that is because, and I think you may know who this is that says this, but also, there's 2 types of problems. There's revenue problems and all other kinds of problems. And at the end of the day, if the cash register is ringing and your company's growing, it's worthwhile to solve those hard technical problems because they matter. They're gonna prevent growth of the business. So when I went to Veracode, it was very similar where we were at Iron Mountain. We were trying to, and from when you were there, right? Trying to grow a digital business,
right?
Trying to get into a new space, trying to expand, and the growth problems are the interesting ones. So when I went to Veracode, similar deal, right? The company was growing, right? And you look across, its people, its process, and its technology. Like at least the good thing for me is at least I still think about it as you still have those pieces that are kind of durable, even if the details change, right? And you can't really grow if you don't look at all three.
Right.
Right. And the technology's changed. Right? I started off like classic project management, waterfall, like let's write it all down and then we'll like try to do software construction. Led several agile transformations, and that gets super interesting because like that is people, process, and technology, and it makes it better for devs, right, or as software engineers. It makes it better for the customer. It's better for the company, right?
So you brought up, and I'm going to go to your most recent experience leading engineers. You brought up it's better for the software engineers, right? So you're leading the team, the Alexa division as a director at Amazon. And obviously, that's probably some of the top talent that's out there as far as their skill set, right? What would you, I'm thinking you're a part of the hiring process, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so what were you looking for, from a good hire? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and this is one of you'll hear a lot of different things from people who have been at Amazon or have worked at Amazon.
Yeah.
And I'm clearly not an Amazon spokesperson or never was, right?
I appreciate that disclaimer. Everyone heard that. This is recorded. Yep.
Yeah. But I would say that there are a couple of things that Amazon, I think really got right on the hiring process around being purposeful, right, which I think is helpful as a hiring manager. So there were a couple of things that I found really helpful to help eliminate bias, right? So one is if you're on an interview team, like you've got a job on that team in terms of what you're looking to do, right? So are you interviewing against, in the case of Amazon, a leadership principle? Are you doing a tech screen for a certain area of the technology that's important? Right. So the notion is, if you're going to interview somebody, like you got to have a plan. Like, what are you trying to get out of the interview?
Yeah.
I think the other part that I tried really hard to do is it's not about trying to trick somebody or get somebody a gotcha question. Right. The goal is to really understand where they're at. Right. Sometimes that means they give you a really good answer and you push more to see like how far can they go.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe they're completely off track and you help them out early and say, like, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm really trying to understand how you think about scaling to like 5,000 transactions per second,
sure,
not 10, right? And then and that's not to trick them. It's to make sure you don't end up at the end of the interview and say, well, I don't think they know about scale because you went down the wrong path, right? So I think as an interviewer, those were some of the things that were important. I'd say two other pieces that I think are takeaways that I still use when I interview folks is like I take really detailed notes. So if I'm interviewing somebody, like I'm banging away on my keyboard while I'm interviewing them, and I sort of politely say, "Hey, I'm not slacking somebody off to the side. I'm taking my notes."
Yeah.
Right. And that was and the reason I had to do that is at Amazon you couldn't say this person doesn't know scale and have that be good enough. Someone would say, "What do you mean? Why do you think that? What question did you ask? What answer did they give?" Right. So you'd have to be precise.
Right.
You couldn't just allude to something. And I think the other piece that I thought was really valuable is to prevent sort of bias in driving, your thinking into someone else is you don't talk to anybody about the person you interviewed before they do. Right. So I wouldn't say like, "Hey Shay, I just saw this person. They were awesome."
Yeah. Right.
Like I think
I'm not going to disagree with you, Jim.
Right. Right. Or I just talked to this person. I think they're a dud. Right. Like instead, like you should be able to form your own opinion, and then we should come together and share and hopefully, the other thing I thought that was really interesting is you could get into a hiring decision and have differing opinions. Where one person would say, like, "Hey, I thought they were good at this." Someone might say, "I thought they were weak at this." And then you'd actually talk about the details, and more times than not, you'd arrive on a really good conclusion on where that person is.
Interesting.
So I know that's a lot on hiring. And in terms of if you're being hired, I think the piece I'd say is, or if you're in an interview process, is just be clear about what you know and what you don't know, right? And the goal is about a match, right? And I think we're lucky enough in technology, and I know it's not true for everyone, that there are a lot of roles. And I know
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to break in, but a lot of folks are in a lucky position where they can say, I want to find a role that's a good match for me, where I can bring my whole self to work, versus I have to take this job because I need it economically. And I think if you're in a position where you have some flexibility, I think look for a place where the interview process works for you. You feel like you can be your true self. You feel like you
Absolutely.
can articulate what you really know. And then people are like, I want that, right? Because you want a match, right? You
Right.
want a place where you're excited about joining the company and they're excited about having you there.
Oh, totally.
And neither of you is perfect, right? Like, why would anyone take a job that they're 100% qualified for and that they don't have anything to learn when they get there?
Yeah, right. It actually makes me think, I was doing wealth management right out of school, and I saw it was like an ad because on like, I don't know what channel we were watching, some finance channel about Betterment. And I was like, wow, they must have paid a lot of money for that ad, because everyone's a wealth manager who's watching how technology is disrupting wealth management. And then I was like, oh no. And then I started in technology. And then I realized I could just show up and be myself every day. And I was like, this is just wonderful. There wasn't my Monday through Friday Shay and then a Saturday, Sunday Shay. It was like, this is just me. And once you find that fit, it changes your life totally. So how would you guys go about making sure like engineers were well trained and they were keeping up with like the latest and greatest? Because you guys have these elite talents that have to fit from both a culture standpoint and from a technology standpoint, but they're going to keep wanting to get better at their skills, right? Like, what were you guys doing to making sure that, and this doesn't have to speak to just, what programs Amazon has, but are there certain resources that are out there that people are leveraging to, for instance, keep up with like the latest on machine learning, which I know your guys' section was big in?
And I think this is one thing where I think the answer changes based on the organization size, right? So I think there's certain things that an Amazon type company can do that may not fit in all companies. But thematically, I think they can. So
well, they have some of the they're like one of those companies that have the unlimited resources, right? Like a Facebook or a Google, or not everyone can be Amazon.
And I think, but there are some things. So for example, when you hire a new employee, like you should have a plan for how they're going to get ramped up. Right. And Amazon is big on mechanisms, right? Which is the notion of you have a process and it's a closed loop process so that you can make sure that it's followed and you have the ability to self-correct if something goes off track. But even as simple as like, hey, if we're going to hire some people, right, in a smaller scale version is maybe it's not a formal launch plan, but like you should have a wiki with new hire resources, right? You should have an onboarding buddy that helps people figure out how to get started, right? You should be clear around like, what are the expectations? I had one client that as they started weren't great necessarily at the onboarding piece. And one of the things I found through conversations that a couple of the new hires who then had some tenure at the company are like, wow, I was super nervous in the first few weeks because I didn't know what was going on. And I was worried people would be like, the imposter syndrome kicks in. Like people are going to be like, oh my gosh, we shouldn't have hired you because you don't know what you're doing. Meanwhile, the company perspective was, of course you don't know what you're doing. You're getting ramped up. You're learning. We've got a complex system. There's a lot for you to learn. So I think there's a piece around the ramp up, which is, again, like, what are those expectations? And not only how are you going to help a new hire get up to speed, but how are they going to feel good about getting up to speed? Like there's nothing like that first check-in, right? Like, all right,
totally. I know it.
I can build something. I can check it in, right? Like there's some pieces where, like, an understanding, like when should you be able to do that? Should you be able to do that on your first day, your first week? Like,
interesting.
are you going to be pairing with somebody? Can you pair on your own machine, or is it going to take you like a month to get your environment set up, right? Like, so there's a bunch of stuff like that. I think that Amazon did really well, but I think other companies also can do well around being purposeful around the onboarding process. And then the question is like, what does career development look like, right? So where, and there's the notion of where can you grow your skills on the job, right? Like okay, here's an interesting project that aligns with what you're looking to do. Can we move you into that project, or can you work on that? I think there's some things that are different in Amazon than other companies, and I don't want to talk too much about Amazon, but
Yeah.
around empowerment of engineers. When you have that many engineers at a company,
Hmm.
there's a lot of mobility to switch to different teams or to work on something new. You
Right.
may not necessarily have that in a smaller organization, but that doesn't mean you can't, again, advocate for, here's something I want to learn, and I want to get involved in it. And if there's a project that lines up, you can work on it. And if not, then it may just be career development, right?
Right.
And the notion of, and I know we're, in a time where maybe going to a conference or an in-person training isn't something that makes perfect sense. But there are also a lot of online opportunities to learn things. And there's also a lot of opportunity for enrichment and finding like where are ways to get started. And I also think if you're in an organization that uses lean practices where you're doing a lot of experiments, oftentimes you can also use lean or use a spike in a sprint to say, hey, maybe we're not ready to go all in on machine learning, but this is a problem that might make sense to use a classifier for. Let's look for an off-the-shelf classifier, throw some training data at it and see what comes out. Like, you don't need to be a PhD
Yeah.
in machine learning to get to get a taste of some of this stuff, potentially add some value to the company, and maybe figure out like, hey, do I have a passion here? Is this something I want to go deeper in or not?
Right.
So,
We can't do online conferences, but you can kind of be everywhere online. Or sorry, we can't do in-person conferences,
yeah,
but it kind of be anywhere online and be just like everybody else showing up. So you don't have to
yeah,
be confined to just DC or Boston, right?
yeah. And I've seen that with I'm somewhat active in DevOps Days Boston, but
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff is and also some of the local meetups. Like I have a colleague who's in Christchurch, New Zealand. I'm like, hey, this is a pretty cool session we're doing next week. That evening our time happens to be morning their time. Like, he's like, cool, I'll carve off an hour and a half and
Yeah,
I'll join the Boston DevOps crew for a little bit of time. So
sure.
yeah,
It's interesting, right? And I think I'm going to use this to segue into what you're doing right now at Cuff Technology Solutions, right? I think you mentioned the other day that you're currently doing some work for a customer that's not local at all.
yeah.
So that's probably changed your business and what you're able to accomplish right now. But just wanted to open up to you. Can you tell me like some of the, I guess, the bigger challenges that you're dealing with right now? What kind of challenges you're helping, folks solve
Yeah.
when they look to you?
Yeah, and again, it's some of it for me. I'm lucky enough that I've been able to work on the things that I find interesting, and I come back to still those same sort of four touchstones. Like, I love working with people I like to work with,
Yep.
right? Company that's got a mission that makes sense, that's coherent, and I get involved in things where there's scale problems, or when the company's worried about what I'll call like a success disaster, which is that thing where it's like, wow, things are going so good, this might actually end up looking like some type of disaster if we don't stay ahead,
Right.
right? It's like, okay, wow, we just signed our biggest customer. Like, as soon as you're done celebrating, you're like, all right, are they going to be referenceable? All right,
Right. Well,
are they
that's
gonna be
exactly.
upset? Are they gonna ask for their money back? Or is this gonna be like one of the biggest successes that gets us to the next level, right?
Right.
So when I get engaged, it's usually and for me, for what I'm doing, I'm usually brought in either by a CEO or a GM of a large division, who's sort of a business person that's like, you know what, there's something here on our tech side that I need support from my team to make sure that we are successful at this next level of scale, right? It's like, okay, we're growing, and my team might need some support, or I may need to suss out a few things to get to the next level. Or the other is, I've got someone who's just like me, who's run really large engineering teams, and they've got a strategic project. And I'm like, this project is so important that they should personally be paying a lot of attention to, but based on their span of control and the scope of the role, they don't have the time to really pay attention to that strategic initiative the way they should. And I've had clients that are like, I need you to go there and like do what I would do, and then tell me when I need to get involved, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's not abdicating the responsibility. I view it as they care enough about it that they brought me in to make sure it goes right. Right. And that it'll be
Right.
done the way they want it to do, or they want it to be done. So
That's pretty awesome.
yeah. And it's
So
fun. It lets you get to work with some interesting problems and some folks that are like, again, it's all about scale, right? So
right.
uh,
So you've obviously accomplished quite a bit, and I know you've beyond just your career.
yeah.
I mean, you're a great father. You and Michelle have what I can see is a great relationship.
Yeah.
And that's not like an easy thing to balance when you're managing your career the way that you have and been so successful. So how do you go about, like, I'm going to call it work-life balance? How do you strike that?
I'll give you two answers on this one. So I think there's one that's just about the personal side of it, which is around you've only got one life, right? So when people say work-life balance, that there's the notion that there's a work life and a personal life, which I obviously, there is that notion of balance, but there really is one life and you're one person, right? So I think that when, at least my view is, and when you've got a partner in life and you've got a family, there's the notion of like, how do you all stay hopefully in sync around what your goals are, where you're going to spend your time, and how things are going to work, right? And when you're not in sync, how do you figure it out and sort of work it out? I think that's one piece. I think the other that I think is been helpful for me is, especially when you're in a leadership role, but I'd also say specifically in a management role, people look to see how do you behave and how do your, and obviously I've been a manager of managers, and how do those folks behave, right? So I think there's a way to be purposeful around, how you behave and where you sort of maybe have your own back and also have your people's backs, right? So like the notion of, right, like I was at one company, I won't say which one, and someone's like, hey, I got here at 9 o'clock, nobody was at their desk. And I'm like, well, there were a couple of people at their desk, but if you want people to punch a clock from 9 to 5, like that's not what we do, right? Like people were, and not that it's about like checking how many hours you work, but I'm like people are doing check-ins at 10 p.m. Do you want me to put you on the check-in list so you can see when code's being committed? Like, which was a bluff, because they should also, I don't want people to be committing code at 10 o'clock at night if they don't want to, right? So
yeah, point taken though.
But but the notion was like, hey, we're not clock watchers here, right? So there's a piece around sort of having your people's back around.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. You had your people's back.
Yeah. And that, we take the business seriously. We're going to get done what needs to be done. We're going to take care of business, but we're also going to lead our lives. And like, and this was a startup. Like, it's not like people weren't working hard; they were working super hard. I think the other piece is, as a manager, making it okay for other people to live their lives, right? So like I've like, and it's small. I think it can be small things, right? So like I had someone that's like, hey, I've got to go to a doctor's appointment tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Is that okay? And my first answer was like, you don't need to check with me to go to a doctor's appointment. But what I would like you to do is please make sure you tell your team that you decided that you have a doctor's appointment to go to and you won't be in until later, right? In a way that makes it okay that when somebody on your team needs to book a doctor's appointment, right, that they won't feel like, oh, can I have a medical issue in the middle of the day? Is that okay? Like,
right.
Like, yes, it is. Like, and
everyone's a person.
Yeah, and how do you
Can't forget that.
And how do you set that tone to make it maybe a little bit less uncomfortable? Right. And so I think there's some pieces like that help you get into better habits around work-life balance, right? And things and a way to sort of lean in and like maybe be a little bit more vocal. And I'm not necessarily, I'm a little bit of a private person, but as a manager, you need to be able to be saying like, hey, it's important that I tell people the reason I'm going to be out this afternoon is because I'm going to watch a high school sports event that one of my kids is in, because someone else might want to do that same thing. And not that they need my permission, but that if they see I'm doing it too, it makes it more okay. So I know that that's a lot sort of on the work life.
Yeah, well, you manage managers too, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, that's part of
Yeah.
what you had to answer there.
And I think that also does connect to, and sort of the private pieces. Like, it's okay to be private. You don't need to share everything. And you want to make sure that folks are comfortable. So you want to be comfortable yourself in how you share. But you also want to make sure that, people can, when you're on your team and you're thinking about work-life balance, that you can have boundaries. Like, you can say, I'm going to be out tomorrow morning. I'm taking sick time, right? You don't need to say that you have a medical appointment or that you're having a specific test or that you're super nervous about it. Now, maybe you want to, but that's a personal decision, where the boundary should be like, it's okay to just say, I have a personal thing. I'm going to have to be out, right?
Right.
Now, if you're comfortable and you can bring your whole self and you want to share more, I think that's okay. But I think it's also okay to have boundaries around what you want to share, that are comfortable for the individual. Right? And I
Right.
think that helps with work life, that bringing your whole self, having one life, and sort of figuring out how to get things done. And I know it's different in certain roles, right? So if you're like working in a command center and you're supposed to be looking at events at certain times,
Yeah.
like, you may have to, it may be harder, you may have to schedule that time, right? Or have somebody cover for you, right? Or if you're in an on-call rotation, you may have somebody take your on-call. But it's still the same thing, which is, right, sort of being purposeful around, like, I need to take this time for myself, and I need to find the way that works for me, to share with the company what I have to share, and also share with my teammates what I want to share around what I'm doing. But I will add that asterisk that if you're a manager or a leader, just challenge yourself to share a little. If you're someone who doesn't share a lot, to share a little bit more if you think it'll help give other people the permission to sort of behave the way that helps them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. There was a leader from Deltec who was in my area, and when I thought he put it in an interesting way. He was like, as a leader, I keep this in mind myself, and I tell other people. So, like, if you have a meeting, and then you also have like your kids' rehearsal or ball game or whatever it is, like in 10 years from now or 5 years from now, when you look back, you're not going to remember what that meeting was about, but your kid's probably going to remember that you weren't there. And then, when you're scheduling your day, just like keep that in mind, that, your personal life should come first in a lot of ways, in a lot of situations, but
totally agree. And I also think that, and I liked your example, but it also made me think that, you want to make sure that you normalize all examples, right? So we all can speak from our personal experience.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should try to project for someone else, but there also can sometimes be the thing where it's like, it's okay to take the morning, off to go to your kids' recital. But if you don't have kids and you've got something else that's equally important in your personal life, that should be okay too, right? So it's a matter of striking that balance versus, if you fit a certain profile or norm, these are the set of things that are okay. If you're in a different profile, like, there's another set of things that are important to you that fall into that personal time / medical time.
I think that's a really good point, Jim, especially like right now. Because I'm at the stage in my life where what I'm usually busy with this time of year is I go to a wedding like every weekend, right? And that is why I'm leaving on, a Thursday at 5, or like off early on a Friday and things like that. And then, folks have kids, and maybe right now that's their reason, they're taking an extended vacation or something like that, but my weddings aren't happening, so it's like, I could just keep working forever because my personal events that usually, cause me to strike a work-life balance are kind of canceled. So that's a good thing for you to bring up. So I just want to bring up a few things that you mentioned here, and then I'll give you the mic for whatever you want to talk about. But as we wrap up, so one thing, you kicked it off saying if it's a good smell, like dig into it, right? And that's you were initially a finance major and you picked up computer science and took tech and ran with it, right? So that was something that I thought was interesting. And then you talked about like the 3 buckets of like when you're picking your career, there's things that you love to do, things that you're good at, and things that have value in the market. So I thought that was interesting. And then you were talking actually about, 4 things like for an organization when you're looking at like a good next step. And it was like people matter, teams matter. The mission matters. That's the third one. And then like scale. And then is it winning? Is it growing? Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of because there's so many opportunities out there in tech right now. There's so many companies. Right. And I think, as I look back on my career so far, that when I've been happiest at an organization, it has hit all those.
Mhm.
And revenue problems and all other problems. I thought that was kind of interesting when looking at companies. In that you're only one person, right? I say work-life balance, and you're like, hey, you can't divide yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's how one of the reasons you've been so
Well,
successful as a
and I
well-rounded
think,
person.
and there's a lot of people that do divide themselves, right?
Yeah.
Where you behave, and I think you even talked about, right? Is this the
Yeah.
work shay or the casual shay? And I think there's folks that that do that today, and some that have to do that in order to be considered appropriate for the role they're in.
Right.
I think when I think about like what am I hopefully optimistic about in terms of where's technology going, is the notion where you can bring your unique self to work and be one person, right? And that a lot of sort of the preconceived notions around what does it mean to be a really good software engineer, right? And some of the things that sort of historically with like the bro culture you'd see in some organizations, like become less of the norm. And the notion is like, I'm not going to be able to look at you and then decide you're a good profile for a software engineer, right? And then the way you speak or how how you express yourself can be based on how you uniquely like to express yourself versus some preconceived norm that forces you to be 2 different people, like the one you really are and the one you have to be in order to get by in the work world.
Interesting. I guess as we look to wrap this up, Jim, I mean, that was a good statement. Is there anything else that you'd like to, I guess, share with the listeners before we kind of bring this home?
I guess the last piece I'd say is that I think it's an exciting time in technology, right? So I've been engaged in technology for quite a while and seen a lot of different change. I think that some of the changes I'm most optimistic about is when you look at things like reducing cognitive load, you look at things around sort of what can make it sort of better. If I'm thinking about sort of from the engineer standpoint, right? I think there's a lot of interesting problems to solve. There's a lot of interesting technology to use to solve it, but I think there's also a lot of really good opportunities to have engineers be really close to the value they're creating. Like when I talk about, there's revenue problems and other problems,
right?
A lot of software engineers like, I don't want to talk about revenue. I don't want to talk about selling stuff.
Right.
Like, I want to solve this really interesting technical problem, right? But I think being able to connect that interesting technical problem to the person who's going to get value out of it, I think is more easy to do today. And I think, when you look at like lean methodologies and the ability to sort of work as an embedded team where you understand where the customer value is going, and the ability to speed up that development process. So it's not like I'm going to work on this thing for 9 months and then it's going to ship and then we're going to start selling it. And then like later on, we'll find out if we did something valuable. Like I think the fact that we're moving to a much higher velocity sort of capability, I think is super exciting. Right.
Yeah, that it goes back to like what I noticed in 2009, right? Because for me at that time, I was like, okay, like Jim Cuff is pretty closely connected to the actual revenue of Iron Mountain, right? Because you have the C-level people asking you, hey, when can I sell this? Because people are asking for it. When can we actually get revenue?
I'm sorry, I've never heard a salesperson ask, when can I sell this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, why can't I sell this now is probably what they're saying. But you just brought up, hey, like more people are having that opportunity where they can get closer to what actually, at the end of the day, like the revenue, sometimes to your point, I think people are thinking that's like a bad thing to talk about, right? A sale, but more people are having the opportunity to become connected to like an end solution, and solutions have value, and that value is monetized.
Yeah. So that,
Right.
so at the end of the day, the revenue is a proxy for creating value. And someone thinks that something is valuable enough that someone will pay for it, right? So
Right.
So I think as engineers and folks on the tech side can get closer to why are we doing this? What's the value? And also be part of that solution creation process where it's not, I need you to build me this thing. It's, hey, we want to solve this problem for this discrete person or persona. Let's talk about how we get that done.
Right.
And maybe you're using containers or lambdas, or talking about your CI/CD pipeline or whatever it may be is part of the how for getting there. But it starts with like, I know why I'm doing this.
Yeah, right. The why. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jim. Well, during this time, like, we want to bring value to the listeners. Jim, I think it was an excellent conversation, and we try to speak to people that are in IT. So like, the engineers that are out there, the developers that are out there, the folks that are listening. If there's someone you have in mind who want to bring on, who's like Jim, and we can have an awesome conversation, and it can help provide some like advice and just some insight into what's happening out there and what's available. Please, let me know. Any feedback is appreciated. And until next time, thank you again, Jim. This was awesome, and hopefully you have a wonderful day and a great weekend.
Yeah, it's always good to talk, Shay. Enjoyed the time.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye.
Bye.